exceed the demands being made by the workers unless it receives more money. To discuss the impact of the strike on the running of Sars, we're now joined by Sars Commissioner Edward Kier. Of just this, how the situation is or was today, which parts of your operations were affected, how seriously, and obviously the impact that has had on taxpayers.
Certainly. I would like, however, just to be clear that it is not SARS refusing to budge. SARS is unable, as you quite rightly pointed out, for the fact that SARS does not allocate its own funding. It receives funding from Treasury. And you know, the disappointing thing for me this year is that it is the second year running where we have been totally transparent with union leaders, including the national leadership of both unions, in terms of our funding constraints, and we have been totally transparent with how much money we have available towards once-off gratuity payments for the performance last year. Plus, we are where we are. And let me start by saying any adverse impact on service is regrettable. And I want to first, to all the taxpayers who in the last few days have experienced that they have had an interruption in a call, or a call that was dropped, or they've arrived at a SARS office and found that its doors were closed, I would like to extend an unreserved apology for that experience. Our call volumes have been at average about 30,000 a day, and it's just impossible for us, given our own resource constraints, as well as the impact of the strike. We have about a third of our staff on strike, and of that, about 50% are in frontline service areas, which is either they are in a branch office or they are in a contact center receiving and attending to incoming calls by taxpayers. And so we have not been able to service the 30,000 calls, and unfortunately we apologize to taxpayers for that. In terms of our branches, we have decided proactively as a risk management to close some of our branches where we felt there was potential for a confrontation between taxpayers and our own striking workers, particularly on sidewalks where taxpayers would queue when they arrive at our offices without an appointment. So it was really as a risk management that we did that. However, every single taxpayer still has access to SARS services that we make available on our e-filing and Mobi app platforms. We also have, through an appointment system, are able to provide interviews to taxpayers on a virtual platform. What that means is a taxpayer can resolve any outstanding matter with SARS through a video call or through a voice call, and that work continues. But I think in terms of the impact, and unfortunately, good news have a way of getting lost and bad news have a way of making the headlines. So what I can say to you is that since the start of filing season this year, we have already seen 3.4 million taxpayers who have been assessed. Of that, just over 2.4 million, 2.7 million have been part of this auto-assessment population. And an auto-assessment is where a taxpayer is able to receive an assessment outcome from SARS where you deploy purely data, technology, and artificial intelligence to produce an assessment outcome for taxpayers. And then we've also had, in the first 10 days, 700,000 taxpayers who have actually submitted their returns on our e-filing platforms. And for us, that's good news. Let me also say what the impact of that has been and the benefit. At a time when we accept that every South African is financially stressed, we were able to resolve 1.1 million instances of refunds, and that results in the payment of 7.1 billion of rand that have found its way back into the pockets of taxpayers just in the last 10 days since we started e-filing. That is, if you compare that with last year in the same period, we resolved just over 400,000 as opposed to the 1.1 million now, and we paid out 4.9 billion rand. So we are extremely encouraged that we have been able to positively impact the lives of significantly more taxpayers, and this has only been made possible because the progress we've made in terms of our journey towards modernization in pursuit of our vision to become a smart, modern SARS. What that also means is that the impact of the strike is minimal. It means that we can still continue to serve our taxpayers through the various alternative channels other than branch walk-ins. We've only had 5,000 branch walk-ins since the beginning of 40,000 e-booking appointments through the virtual channels and 5,000 in-person branch appointments since the 1st of July. And that's really encouraging for us. So the journey to migrate more and more taxpayers onto our digital platforms, the deployment of artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms, are all beginning to bear fruit. Now let me just come back to the strike. It is therefore unfortunate that unions still think that a strike is the most effective way to engage with us. Given the fact that this is not of my own making, that I'm reliant on funding allocation, and given the fact that we've expressed a willingness to work with our trade union leaders to improve the overall value proposition to our staff, it is rather disappointing that they feel that the traditional form of withholding their labor is going to have a real impact.
But I mean, isn't that in the nature of things that when workers are not happy and they don't seem to be making headways during negotiations, the weapon of last resort is withdrawing their labor?
And I think historically, and in many industries, that still applies. I have reached out to our trade union leaders when I restarted at SARS 3 years ago. I said to them, here is what's going to happen. Increasingly, our modernization will automate routine work. It will disintermediate a lot of the manual processing. What are we going to do with our people? Why don't you work with me so that we can upskill our people, give them better skills, make them more valuable to us, and as a consequence of that, their overall remuneration will improve.
Has there been resistance to that?
Well, right now we could be sitting around the table with trade unions talking about that instead of being on a strike. And that's the unfortunate situation. We have now, tomorrow we will deploy 150 temporary contact center agents to try and bring some relief. We are in the process of bringing on board over the next 12 months 250 additional service consultants, but a new breed of service consultants that is a significant departure from our current. Many of our staff worked in there for years. They have become used to the old way of working. And this is a message for all employers. We have to take our staff along with us as we modernize our processes and as we work towards a completely different world of work. Let me share with you some data points. At the start of COVID, only 10% of our people were enabled to work remotely. Today, that number is more than 90%. At the start of COVID, within the first 100 days, we built and deployed an additional 45 additional digital applications to make more of our work, enable more of our taxpayers to resolve their matters online. The 2.7 million taxpayers or 3.4 million taxpayers, of which a significant component have been through the auto assessment, is another advancement that makes life easier for taxpayers deploying technology and data. Unless we sit around the table and work at a really, really faster pace than what we currently have been able to do to upskill and evolve our workforce to be future-proofed, I'm afraid South Africa's problem of unemployability of our workforce will get worse. If you open every newspaper, it's not, of course we have a job shortage, but for many of the jobs that we have, our people need to be made ready, they need to be upskilled, they need to evolve, and my plea to union leadership is we need a different model of engagement than this war of attrition where we try and wear each other down, and in the end, everyone loses. That model, I would be bold enough to say, is a model of yesteryear. It will not work in the future.
Well, I don't think anyone will disagree with you or take issue with you. I think the benefits or impacts of your e-filing, the auto assessments you spoke about earlier, are being or have been felt by taxpayers generally. So you probably have them on your side. But I think where, for example, let's say you bring in people who are then going to do the work of the striking workers, isn't that tantamount to basically bring people who are going to cross the picket line, and that then putting you in an even more confrontational situation with your workforce, who may see you as basically thumping your nose?
I'm glad you asked that question because it allows me to set the record straight. These initiatives to train additional contact center agents and to bring on board over the next 12 months additional service consultants is not because of the strike. It is driven because of the staff shortage that we have had. For 5, almost 6 years, we were unable to recruit any staff because of budget constraints. Last year, for the first time, Treasury gave additional money to fill those vacancies, and we have begun in earnest. So I want to be very clear, these initiatives just happen to coincide. For me to say to you that we are able to deploy 150 additional contact center agents, I couldn't have dreamt that up last week. We've started that process months ago. We've started the defining a different career path, a different model for service consultants more than a year ago. And so it just is fortuitous for us that the harvesting of that benefit coincides with the taxpayers. But at the end of the day, everyone will decide whether our bona fides are above board or not. What I can tell you is whatever I've shared with you now, I can do so in good conscience without any fear of contradiction. I want to come back to my original point. I invite our trade unions, leaders, to sit around the table and to honestly and earnestly say, what is the best way to improve the overall employee value proposition so that our employees do not become irrelevant in this process of modernization of the workplace?
Couple of quick ones, Commissioner. We have run out of time. One is, you said at the beginning that you're not playing games, you're not being mischievous, and you have been transparent with the workers. In other words, what is happening now, or where things are, the situation is beyond your control because you are acting within, you have to make do with what you have, and the situation is beyond your control. What does that mean then going forward? Is that you saying there is nothing whatsoever that you can do right now, and the workers you are dealing with should understand it because you've played?
Whether they understand or accept that is not for me to say. But here is what I can say without fear of contradiction. One, I have been very transparent in my communication to our trade unions that we are allocated our funding. We then took the funding. I did this, by the way, last year as well, and said, this is about what we have, circa between 10 and 11 billion between last year and this year. Some of that money, about $1 billion, was earmarked for vacancies and specific modernization projects. You know, about more than 8 billion of the 10 billion is for staffing. Our salary bill is significantly high. A 5% increase on the bill of 8 billion rand is another 400 million rand that I just don't have. I will be breaking the PFMA and regulations that I am supposed to work with if I spend money that I don't have. So whether or not trade unions understand or accept that, I cannot say. But what I can say is we have communicated that consistently and transparently to them. Why they choose to ignore that, they will have to explain why they choose to in fact embark on a strike. If we were an organization, you know, when I was a CEO of a listed company, I have a lot more room to negotiate because I am perfectly empowered by my board, subject to factors of affordability and other factors to decide how much I want to allocate to salaries. Unfortunately, in this case, I and every other Director General in a department of government are allocated funding and they have to live within their means.